All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Climate Outreach's webinar on communicating climate change in Tunisia, Egypt, and Mauritania with lessons for North Africa and the Levant region. I see a lot of you are already doing this, but feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window and let us know where you're from. I'm also pasting the link in the chat to the English version of this report, so feel free to download it and view it alongside the webinar. We'll also have a Q&A session with our panelists towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please send them through via the Q&A box and let us know which panelist the question is directed to. I'll now hand you over to one of the authors and one of the panelists for today's webinar, Robin.
Hi, everybody, and really excited to see you all joining our webinar. For us, this is the culmination of really 2 years of big work working on this project. So we're really excited to see you joining us. And I will be presenting the results of the report that we are launching today, but also my colleague Fatima At-Ahuli from Can Arab World and Mohammed Kamal, our partner from Egypt, will also be explaining the report from their perspective and the work that we did on it. So I just want to start by giving a strong impression of the partners that have worked together, because this truly is a collaborative effort. So I'm the lead for advocacy communications, working with campaigners around the world for climate outreach. And we work on the social science of climate change engagement. That is trying to be a link between people who work on the theory of social science of climate change and those who are out there in the world doing the work. And I've been working with colleagues in this project at Climate Action Network Arab World, and in Climate Action Network International, and our national partners, Greenish in Egypt, Earth Hour in Tunisia, and the RIM Climate Movement in Mauritania. And I just wanted to ask my colleagues to quickly say hello and introduce themselves from all of those partners. So I just wanted to first of all ask Fatima to introduce herself.
Hello everyone, this is Fatima. I am the regional coordinator of Climate Action Network Arab World.
Thanks so much. And Musa from RIM Mauritania.
Hi everyone, my name is Musa Idi Mansal. I'm from Mauritania and I'm the executive director of RIM Youth Climate Movement, also a member of the Can Arab World.
Thank you so much. And Mohammed from Greenish in Egypt.
Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. This is Mohammed Kamal, a waste management and environmental specialist from Greenish in Egypt.
And last but definitely not least, Essia from Earth Hour Tunisia.
Hi everyone, I am Essia Gizi, board member with the Earth Hour Tunisia Association and also a board member with Climate Action International. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I wanted to get everybody's voices in early. So to explain what a collaborative effort this project has been. So just to explain what this work has been across the last 2 years. We have been doing social science research work across 3 focus countries in North Africa. That is Tunisia, Egypt, and Mauritania. And our aim has been to test the language of climate change in order that we can create advice that climate advocates across civil society, but also communicating and campaigning on climate change in government, in the media, in business, can use to engage people in terms that resonate with their culture and their experience. And this has come from a logic and an understanding that the very large amounts of climate change communications research that has been done in the past in a very small and unrepresentative number of countries around the world. So as mainly Western countries, in the UK, in Europe, North America, and Australia. And very little effort has been invested in engaging and thinking about how climate change is engaged with and thought about, what it means culturally to people in other parts of the world, people who are very profoundly impacted by the impacts of climate change and deserve to have a voice in the international climate change conversation. So this for us at Climate Outreach has been part of the impetus of starting this work. And in doing this work, we have not only chosen to undertake research with the elites, but with a very wide diversity of audiences in the different countries that we've worked in. So just for example, rural women, fishermen, disabled people, local and national politicians, students, farmers and herders. So we have really tried in each country within the limits of our time and capacity to reach out and get a broader understanding of how people talk and think about climate change in the countries that we've done this work in. And this report launch has a double process. So this is the climate outreach webinar, which is really the aim of this webinar is to explain and explore the results of the research that we have done. But not only that, our learnings from the process and our reflections from engaging with each other as a team. And speaking at this webinar will be myself, Fatima speaking for CAN Arab World, and Mohammed will be speaking about the process that I've gone through in Egypt. And then we will have a question and answer at the end of the session, at which Musa and Essia will also be available for questions. But we have a second event coming up in just a couple of weeks, the CAN Arab World Roundtable, at which each of the national partners will explore in more depth and detail their experience and what the results of the report mean in the 3 focus countries. And that will be undertaken in Arabic with English translation. And from my own recent experience of working with simultaneous interpreters, which you can do via Zoom, I really encourage you to attend that roundtable, because it's really, really interesting just even to be able to speak across the language divide and to have a really in-depth conversation. So this is part of a two-pronged process in launching the report. I want to go into talking about what we did in this report and why we did it. What's the logic behind it? So we have been following a model which at Climate Outreach we have called the Global Narratives Model. What we have meant by this is a model of research which is really intended to be bottom up. So the model of research that we have used is working in each country with a national partner who then worked with a set of national partners, civil society partners in their own country, and in running a training where people were trained to deliver narrative workshops, that is values-based focus groups with different audiences in their country. So in each country, we undertook a training where people were trained how to deliver focus groups, and the focus groups were then run with this wide diversity of audiences, with fishermen, with farmers, with students, with politicians, with journalists. So then we gathered all of this data in transcripts and brought the transcripts back, and then discussed in a second training what we could see from the analysis, what we had heard in the analysis and in the transcripts and in the focus groups. And that was then also translated into English, and Climate Outreach undertook formal analysis of the transcripts that we heard. And also in Egypt, Mohammed undertook that research from the Egyptian perspective. So this is how this work has worked across the different countries. So in total, in this project, we have 25 in-country partner organizations running a total of 33 narrative workshops with 248 participants across the 3 different countries. So that is the sort of total sum of the work that has been done and that we're drawing upon in this webinar. So just to give you an indication of where the countries are. So for those of us who are more used to European timescales and European distances, we have Mauritania in Northwest Africa, Tunisia in Northern Africa, and Egypt in Northern Africa. And these countries are all Islamic-speaking, majority Arabic-speaking countries, and based in North Africa. So there, of course, there are commonalities of experience, commonalities of culture and background, but in a project which looks at those commonalities, which draws on those commonalities, we also have to be aware of the many differences between the different countries, of course, which for anyone used to European distances, you can see that it is a 4-hour plane ride from Tunisia to Mauritania, for example. So we tried to draw out what were the commonalities of experience between these different countries, but also to think about the unique aspects of them. And why have we chosen to work in this region? Well, I think one really important thing to think about is these are some of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, countries that could experience some of the worst impacts of climate change. And I just picked out a few statistics at random here. In Tunisia, water availability could decline by 28% by 2030. Alexandria in Egypt is the most vulnerable city in the world to sea level rise by the middle of the century. Temperatures in Mauritania, already desertified and extremely hot country, could rise at 1.5 times the global average. So we are talking about countries where social life, society, how we see culture now is potentially existentially threatened by the future of climate change, and countries in which you think that we should be having very active conversations about the impacts of climate change. But what we actually find in reality is that both the levels of climate concern and climate awareness is actually lower than other parts of the world, and it is less well investigated. So first of all, when we did our literature review backing up this project, we saw that public engagement in climate change across Arabic-speaking countries is generally a neglected research area. This has started to change in the last few years as online, particularly as more online surveys have been done. But of course, we know that there are many limitations to online surveys, not least that only people with access to the internet, with the willingness to undertake surveys, will tend to complete them. So there's been very little qualitative in-depth research thinking about how people engage with and think about climate change in this part of the world. But what those online surveys that do exist tend to show us is that concern about climate change is lower in this part of the world than in other parts of the world. So just to pick out one poll that we looked at, saying that 60% of North Africans say climate change is a threat to their country, as versus 93% in Southern Europe. That's one 2019 poll. A poll undertaken more recently found that across Arabic-speaking countries, fewer people tend to support climate policies than in other parts of the world, though they did still support quite a large number of climate policies. So this is not a complete rejection of climate change as a concept, but definitely a lower level of engagement, a lower level of thought about the issue. And of course, just to reiterate, there is significant variation across the different countries. Of course, massive variation across different countries about engagement in climate change. So to pick one statistic, in Morocco, 71% of respondents in one survey responded that climate change existed and was human caused, whereas in Egypt, the figure was 26%. And the links to all those polls that we explored in the literature review are in the report that can be downloaded. So, and then we have also thought much more deeply, as we've been doing this work, about if we're doing these limited number of focus groups around 3 countries, what does that mean? What can we learn from that? In what country? What does that? All of these countries are majority Islamic, Arabic speaking, and also subject to similar levels of impacts of climate change, and potentially also subject to similar levels of political and social disruption, similar dynamics affecting all of the countries. So what we have thought about, the countries that we think we might be able to draw lessons from in this project are other countries in North Africa, and also countries in the Levant region. So that is countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan. There may be some learnings in this project that can be of use to advocates who are working in those countries. But just to kind of, I think, give a reality check on our work and to be humble about it, we are not saying that in this work, we are doing an in-depth exploration of, for example, what engaging in the Islamic faith means of people's attitudes to climate change, or what people in Levant think about climate change. We merely hope that the work can be useful and can have some resonances with people that are thinking about those issues. Fatima, I don't know if you also wanted to add anything on that, because you and I have both been thinking about that together.
Yes, I mean, in addition to what you have mentioned, Robin, also the climate change topic itself is a very new topic for the region, and the knowledge is very minimum. So the awareness and access to information is another aspect that all these countries share, is that there is less awareness and information in the target languages in these countries that is being worked on and explored. So another aspect is the knowledge itself about climate change.
Thank you so much, thanks. So I just want to go into thinking a really quick summary from the kind of researcher's perspective of what the key findings from the report were and what the recommendations are as a result of that. So just thinking about these in kind of categories, the first category I wanted to talk about is the voice of impacted people and what that means for climate awareness across the different places that we undertook the research. First of all, one thing, and for me this was one of the most striking and powerful parts of the research, was that in every workshop we found participants speaking about the changes they were observing around them on a day-to-day basis. People talk particularly about changes to the seasons that they were observing. They talked powerfully about often kind of recent flooding that had been observed in cities. Like this was in every workshop people talked about, it was just taken for granted. And in some cases, I remember in one transcript saying, it says, you know, do you think about climate change, or do you think about these changes? And someone said, of course, because it's just a part of life. And what we found is that fishermen and farmers, particularly those people who were engaged and living in rural areas and experiencing engagement with the natural world as a part of their day-to-day lives, were particularly had first-hand knowledge, were able to speak the most powerfully about the changes that they were observing. And we also saw people talking about the stories of older people and saying, older people tell us that it used to be different. And these people spoke about the changes they saw taking place around them in their daily lives. They also spoke about changes that were nationally significant. So, you know, for example, like flooding in the capital city that happened last year. People were aware of these changes, able to speak about them, able to experience them. So I just put a few quotes that I picked out from the focus groups here, from the 3 different countries about these changes that people talked about. But to be honest, I could have picked out 20. Talking about the changes that they are observing to the seasons, to the fish species, to farming, to when the rainy season was coming. There were many quotes from the focus groups reiterating this point. But the flip side of this is that though people had high awareness of changes happening about them, they had low awareness and understanding that this is climate change. This is a thing you call climate change. And when we asked people, did they know like what the causes of climate change were, in a region where about 98% of energy comes from fossil fuels, virtually nobody was able to spontaneously say burning fossil fuels is the reason why this is happening. And this was even among participants who'd had access to higher education. Participants who had access to higher education did have a greater knowledge and understanding of climate change. But even amongst them, they were often confused, often, like, for example, talking about the ozone layer or other environmental issues. So there was not a high level of awareness of climate education in the people that we spoke to. There was a high awareness of local environmental changes. So, for example, in Tunisia, people spoke a lot about waste issues. People were aware of the changes happening, local changes happening around them, and they're often very understandably mix those up with the sort of impacts of climate change in their conversation. And also participants in our focus groups valued and really asked for more information. So they said, you're telling us new things here in this focus group. I haven't heard about this before. I want to understand it. I want you to give me more information about what climate change might mean for me. So there was a really powerful sense of experiencing climate change, but not being given the kind of capacity or ability to really engage with that, as people should have the right to do so. And there's obviously one clear reason for this, that the language around climate change is kind of highly technical and off-putting. And we even found in some of the focus groups, as many of you who are Arabic speaking may know, the term climate change is potentially very confusing in Arabic. In fact, I wonder if one of my Arabic speaking colleagues might be able to say the word in Arabic for me. Fatima, I don't know if you could just...
تغير المناخ.
I'm not even going to try and repeat it. I think I will say it wrong. But the term itself can be very easily confused and meant to mean meant to sound like kind of the daily fluctuations of the weather. And so when we're talking, for example, in farmers in Egypt, they often entered into that confusion. And also the technical language, for example, around renewable energy was very off-putting for people. And what language that worked much better was simple, direct language, words like clean, polluting, which resonated much more deeply with people and sort of meant something to them. And this, of course, reflects the kind of results we've seen around the world when we talk to people about climate change, the need for simple, direct, locally relevant language. And we also saw a distrust of kind of grandiose claims, language that sounded political. Particularly and in countries where people distrust sometimes or feel cynical about politicians, language that sounded like it was making political type claims was often distrusted and people often rejected it. So to turn that into a set of recommendations, when thinking about what this might mean for us, we suggest that it's really important in this region to respect and to help to amplify the voice of people who are witnessing climate change or experiencing it, including those who are perhaps often have less power, but who are able to speak about it most powerfully: fishermen, farmers, older people. Also to raise awareness and counter misconceptions about climate change. People are asking for education, they're asking for information to understand what this means. To use in this locally and nationally recognised impacts as a starting point. And we've seen in other research that one reason perhaps why climate change may be less discussed in Arabic-speaking countries is that people tend to focus more on sort of local campaigns. So the idea of the recognition of local campaigns being used as a starting point to talk powerfully about this larger global issue could be a way into talking about climate change. Second set of results I'm going to talk about from the research perspective are social solidarity, resilience, and action. As a Westerner, I think this was something that I found really powerful reading the transcripts from the work that we did, is across the different countries, the strong values that we saw related to social solidarity, people talking about togetherness, community support, respect for each other, a real sense that people are willing to work together. And just to sort of take an example from the different countries, Mohammed, I wonder if you could just explain the concept here of gadana in case I say it wrong.
Oh, that was a very good attempt. The word is gadana, and it's an Arabic word, but very, very often it's used in Egypt, and it doesn't have a direct translation at all. And this is something we actually struggled with.
Thank you. But the concept of use. Go on, Mohammed. You cut out.
Yeah, sorry, I just got a pop-up on my window, my screen. Yes, can you see me? I don't know my.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, so gadana is a term, more or less, is you have trust in someone that they'll be there in your time of need. There's it's a shared sort of feeling people have towards each other, and unfortunately, there's no direct meaning for it in English, but in Arabic, it's a widely used term in Egypt.
Thank you. That's great. So this phrase and idea was used a lot in the Egyptian transcripts, and in Tunisia, we saw the concept of respect being used a great deal. And in Mauritania, people talking about hospitality, and also the idea that they could be able to mobilize and respond and work together in response to challenges. And again, I just sort of picked out a few quotes where we could see these values being expressed in people's conversation. The idea we should respect each other and respect ourselves in Tunisia, people talking. And then I think this real strong sense of social solidarity and people talking together was reflected very strongly in many of the quotes that we saw. So there's a strong sense of social solidarity, and then also allied to that, a strong sense of resilience. People living through cultures that have experienced large amounts of disruption, large amounts of change, political turbulence, security risks, and a strong sense coming as a result of that, the people are resilient and able to come together and work together. The kind of flip side of that, sometimes that we saw, is this feeling, it could lead to a kind of feeling of like we can cope with anything, or anything is going to come at us, and we will be able to respond. And that could lead to a sense of sort of passivity, almost a sense of not being able to, that it doesn't matter what you do in response. So thinking about what this might mean in terms of recommendations, we suggest that language that in this part of the world, that language that speaks to this sense of togetherness, community, building robust communities in times of change could be really powerful language to use. And also supporting the idea of mobilizing together, people getting together to do something. But allied to that, providing a sense that people can do something in response. And we see this in social science research around the world, that if people are presented with overwhelming, negative, terrifying facts, they need a sense of agency. They need a sense that there is something that they can do in response. And of course, with communities that can be disempowered or have less practical ability to respond to changes, this can be a real challenge for us as campaigners. We do know that psychologically, it's one way to speak powerfully to people. Just then, before I pass on to my colleagues, I want to talk about some of the kind of more areas of take care and some of the learnings that we took from working on this project. So in the language of personal responsibility and blame, and I felt like I didn't have to put any bullet points down here because I think the quotes I've put there have speak perfectly to reality that we faced. Across all three countries, people responded very negatively to language which appeared to be holding them accountable, appeared to be holding them responsible for the changes that are happening to the climate, quite rightly and understandably, as this in terms of people not being responsible for that in the first place. And this language that I'm showing here is language that we tested in our test narratives, talking about our greed for material things is to blame. Through our ignorance, arrogance, and greed, we have damaged the gift of the world. This is some language that we have in the past as climate outreach, tested with faith-based communities and found to be quite powerful as a people of Islamic faith from people who are based in the UK. So we thought that this language might work. It might be something that was powerful to people. But in reality, it was strongly rejected because quite rightly, people living in a part of the world who have not caused the problems and who are should not be held accountable thoroughly rejected it and said, this is your problem and I didn't create it. And I think this creates an interesting challenge for people working in climate advocacy in this part of the world. It's not the same as working with Westerners who can and should be held accountable and responsible for that change in lifestyles. Indeed, using this kind of language and ideas can be rightly extremely off-putting for people. We also found some complex results in terms of using faith-based messaging. And here I was going to pass on to my colleague Fatima.
Thank you, Robin. So so this was like one of the common topics that have been raised in all countries, but mainly in Mauritania, and it has to do with faith-based messaging. So Islam as a dominant ideology in these communities and in these countries, it has a very deep impact on the cultural attitudes and social norms of the population, and it is embedded in the lives of many in all different ways, and it was detected mostly in Mauritania, where people consider themselves as guardians of Earth, which is one of the teachings of Islam, that humans are guardians of Earth, or what we call in Arabic khulafa fil ard, which translates into creatures who supervise the earth. And also another outcome has to do with the fate and the free will that these teachings have to do with people's decisions and how they engage with nature, with each other, and with their environment. So one of the things that we were trying to push forward to in the study is to encourage Islamic leaders to work more on engaging people in the climate fight through the teachings that emphasize the importance of environmental importance of nature and of the gift that has been given to humans as referring to Earth in this sense. So the study itself didn't go into depth in this aspect here, but we found that it's a very important area that needs further explore, that needs further attention, but also that is an opportunity that we communicators in the climate change field can really use, and to communicate climate change messaging through the faith and the teachings of Islam. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Fatima. And just finishing off some of my own kind of reflections, I think, on having been a part of this project. is the sense of some learnings that we had coming from this project. And one kind of really interesting learning is at one point we were thinking about what's going to be the title of the work, and we thought about using the term MENA to talk about some of the countries that we had been working in. But actually, as we discussed this, we really understood and talked more about the use of the term, and the MENA, ME, standing for Middle East. And that this is a term that has its roots in British colonialism, as in the Middle East only comes from the perspective of looking from a UK perspective, which for myself is not something I'd ever even thought about before we started having this conversation. And it's going to show how some of the language that we can be using in projects like this needs to be explored and investigated, where that language is coming from, so that we can genuinely have a conversation which is meaningful to everybody. A different challenge which arose in this is the methodologies that might be adopted from and brought from a Western context. So for example, for recruiting participants for our focus groups in Mauritania, we had to use a different methodology than using a kind of randomized style of finding people, a methodology that involved going to local leaders and asking them to find community representatives, because this is the only culturally appropriate way of doing this kind of focus group recruitment in Mauritania. So it showed the importance and of engaging and understanding the need to use different approaches in the different contexts in which we found ourselves. And for myself, I think one overriding lesson that I've learned is about the importance of listening to each other and building relationships as a part of the project team, and when working with people from different backgrounds, to actually find out what is needed, what work is needed, and investing in that long-term process of building relationships so that we can find ways to support each other. And that's been a lesson I think that we've had reiterated again and again through the course of the project. So that I think I've just summarized there, taking care with the language of personal responsibility and blame, the complications and nuances around working with faith-based messaging, and taking care with Western terms of methodologies and taking that listening approach. I want to pass on to my colleague, Mohammed, to talk a little bit about the in-depth experience of working in Egypt on this project.
Thank you, Robin. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yeah.
Perfect, okay. So I gave a very quick introduction about myself at the very start. My name is Mohammed Kamal. I'm actually a waste management specialist and environmental specialist. But in this project, I was more or less at the very start, I was a coordinator, meaning I was coordinating between all the different facilitators that were conducting the focus workshops. And later on in the project, I became the research analyst, because I have a master's in public health engineering, and I've done a number of research projects before with similar, I guess, methodologies. So the purpose of the slide in front of you is not to confuse you. It's more or less to explain or summarize the journey that we had to reach our input into the report in Egypt. So it all started off by Greenish. So Greenish is basically a social awareness or a social organization focused on environmental issues. And they brought together a network of local partners from across the continent, from across the country, sorry. And these partners, basically, each partner provided one or two facilitators. Each facilitator was tasked with the mission of conducting a focus group or a workshop with a specific group that was chosen based on a methodology. So we wanted to cover as much of the Egyptian society as possible, knowing that we have certain limitations. And my role was to support them conducting the workshops, and then later on to translate these workshops into English, transcribed and translated, and then later on to analyze these workshops and the outputs that came from them, together with Climate Outreach and Robin, and use these inputs for the report. So this is basically a quick summary of the process itself. So the next slide, Robin. Yes. So I basically gave a very quick summary, but what did we cover? So who did we cover in our study? We covered 6 governorates in Egypt. We tried our best to cover as much of the map as possible in the country. There was a total of 12 focus groups conducted. It covered fishermen, farmers, people who work in the tourism sector, etc. There was vulnerable groups and very common groups, such as students and urban communities and rural communities. What I'm going to focus on for the next maybe 2-3 minutes is the key. What do I want you to take out of this? What do I want you to take out of this project or this report? Of course, I can't cover it all. I'll do my best to cover the key points, which Robin did touch on already. There's 3 things that stand out in terms of what we should not do. The first thing that we were surprised with in Egypt was regarding how bad it is in terms of people's basic understanding of climate change. It is below poor in the sense of when I say below poor or below what we expected, it's people have misunderstandings. They make up things about climate change. And this was the case in Egypt. So they wouldn't know what climate change is, and they would make up things about it. So it's worse. It's not even that they don't know, but they misunderstand. That was the case with the farmers. The other thing is we during the workshops, you realize that people don't want to be told another problem. They have enough problems. So why are you telling me another problem? Why don't you communicate to me something that I can do about it, or not even tell me about the problem to begin with? The last thing was regarding the fact of trying to, and this is something else I'm going to discuss towards the very end now, is putting into perspective the daily struggle people have, and then trying to visualize for them, oh, by the way, climate change in 25 years will cause you serious issues in Egypt because of 1, 2, 3. These issues wouldn't mean much to them to begin with. So when we're trying to design narratives or trying to design communication to these specific groups, we need to be very cautious of their daily struggle, that it might not be relevant to them to speak about, for example, the rise in sea level. This means nothing to them. They're struggling to, for example, to provide a daily income to feed their family. This is something that they wouldn't care about to begin with. So if I can move on to the next slide. I think, yes. So the solution to that, or the positive output we got from the workshops for these specific points, one was using very simple language. And I think Robin touched on this already. Simple language worked great. The second thing was to avoid blaming or using even no matter how simple it is, but if there's a sense of blame that people feel when they're being spoken to regarding climate change, it causes issues and they start to lose interest to begin with. And then finally, you have to capitalize on people's emotions, not in a bad way. What I'm trying to say here is, in Egypt, we've realized and we found that resilience was a very strong emotion people feel. They feel that no matter the problem or the challenge, we'll be able to adapt. It's fine. We've adapted to a lot of problems in the past. So there's this sense of resilience. We need to capitalize on that in our language. And I think that's a very important finding from the overall study. So the next slide, I think I continue building on that. Yes. I think the key finding for myself was how much of a difference translation makes when it comes to narratives and language. A lot of the power we have in English is lost the second it's translated into Arabic. And when we want to design targeted narratives or communication, or we're trying to design an awareness campaign, it has to be contextualized in the sense of the language itself, not just Arabic, but relevant Arabic to that community or that specific group. In our focus groups, there were groups in the Red Sea zone and groups in the northern area of Egypt, near the Mediterranean Sea. You can't use the same language with these two groups. You can't use even the same type of Egyptian Arabic. You have to be very careful with the language you use. And then I think there was one more slide. Yes. I think to conclude from my side, something else I want to reflect on, when we were conducting the research or analyzing the results we got from the transcribed groups and the transcribed minutes, was, as a researcher, I realized there's a lot of subjectivity I can have in the findings that we come out with. And another point that I learned while working with climate outreach was the concept of ontological assumptions, and the fact that what I perceive as logical as a researcher or as someone who lives in the UK is not, and more certainly will not be the same way someone perceives logic in another country. So the way we perceive the world around us, or the nature of the world around us, differs. Now, why is this relevant to climate change? It's very relevant because what you perceive as something bad, for someone else it might not be. They might even perceive it as something that's not important, not bad, might perceive it as something good. We need to be very careful about that in our language. We need to be very careful. How do people perceive the world around them in that place? Now, I might be going too far, but I mentioned this, and what I'm trying to say here is we have to be very careful how we speak to people who aren't used to being bombarded with social media. Because in a lot of rural areas in Egypt, social media is not something people open on a daily basis. But in the urban world we live in, it's something that I don't think we can spend a day without checking the news or opening our social media. So we're used to being bombarded with information, but people in rural areas are not. And that's why we need to be very careful on how they perceive the world compared to us. I think this was everything from my side. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. It's really fascinating to hear you speak from it. And I'm going to pass straight on to my colleague, Fatima from Can Arab World.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Mohammed. So my slides will be like complementary to all what has already been mentioned here. Next slide, Robin. So why is the message testing project very important for us as Climate Action Network Arab World? So the message testing project happens to be one of the first and most important projects for Can Arab World because it is through which we were able to tackle one of the most important areas around climate change in the region, which is awareness. So as I mentioned, it's one of the aspects that Can Arab World works on is raising awareness about climate change, but developing methodologies that are revolutionary, and the research is really putting the revolution on climate change awareness into a different level. Also, we were able through this project to engage our members in 3 countries, and they were able to work together in a big scale project such as this one, which has taken a lot of effort and time and capacity to achieve it and to come to this point where we are launching it today. Also, it has tested our ability to manage such a complex project, and with all the challenges that came with it, it tested us as not only as individuals, but as a network as a whole. Like, how are we going to manage difficulties and challenges that the project has represented along the 2 years? They were not smooth at all. They were ups and downs, and so it really tested our capacity on how we are going to work together and come to a point where we are going to share the results of this report. So the project represents an important foundation for us as civil society organizations working on raising awareness and communicating about climate change. It also provides what we can define as a roadmap for a different approach on how to mobilize different communities to be part of the decision making in their countries. So this is for us as Can Arab World, but our learnings, I kind of divided them into 2 aspects. One of them has to do with management, and during the 2 years working on this project, as mentioned, it has came with so many challenges, and eventually these challenges became learning opportunities. So on one of the aspects that we have learned a lot during the project has to do with the management aspect, and we have learned that it is very important to have a clear understanding of countries' regulations in terms of fund management. So receiving fines and managing fines. So that's one of the key aspects that we have, that the project has taught us a lot on how to deal with such a situation. Also, internal capacity, and how it is crucial to have at least 2 individuals engaged in this long-term project, so that the learning and the knowledge can be like smoothly transferred from one staff to another. But on a positive note, also there is always a way to get around a challenge, as long as the team that you are working with, they have one objective, one goal, like they share that goal. So it is very important that everyone in that team share that goal, so everyone can work towards achieving it, no matter what the challenges come along the way. Next slide, Robin, please. And another aspect on how the project has taught us a lot, it has to do with the text itself, and how we were formulating it, and how we were like editing it and putting our comments, and working on defining it and tuning it and all that. So in terms of the research, it was very crucial to go into depth discussions when it comes to cultures, beliefs, before making any type of arguments. It was we went through deep discussions into the cultures in these countries, into the faith, into like what to say, what not to say, our limits and our opportunities, and how we are going to say that. So it is very important to go into in-depth discussions and always be aware that another perspective exists, and never ignore that perspective. And it is very important to actually explore it, and because that's the way that the research has become as rich as is, and to present these results is because we've been questioning every single step on our way, so we can come to a result where everyone can be satisfied with what the report has come with. Also, in addition to that, the success of any project comes down to the individuals who are involved, as I mentioned before, and therefore it is very important to have partners who believe that the project is theirs from the beginning to the end. So the feeling of ownership over any project or any type of human experience provides this experience with the strength it needs to be implemented. Yeah, so as a whole, like, the project has come with so many challenges and so many learning opportunities that has enlightened us and provided us with enough data to explore other countries, hopefully in the future. Thank you, Robin. You can. I think now we can open the floor for questions.
Thanks so much, Fatima, and it's really fascinating to hear you talk about it, and for me, like, quite moving when I think about all of that we have gone through to get to this point, and that sometimes many of the struggles can end up being an advantage in what we have learned from. I do completely agree with that. Sorry, I moved the slide on slightly too quickly, but this is the moment to ask the questions. And as you see, this is the front cover of the report that's being launched today. I also wanted to encourage you to visit the website. We've got a great 4 to 5 minute video from Greenish, Mohammed's organization, talking about their experience in Arabic with captions, which for Arabic and English speakers, I really encourage you to look at, because I think it's a great resource. So Mohammed, Abhishek, I'll pass to you for any questions you want to pass to the panel.
Thanks, Robin. We'll start off with a question from Yasmin. Yasmin is a climate and energy consultant who wants to start researching climate change impacts in Tunisia and the Maghreb region. She's interested in joining a group of researchers interested to study the area, and was wondering if there are further plans to study the region.
I think we have been exploring how we might take this work to other colleagues and other countries, particularly in the CAN Arab World Network. Also, I might pass to my colleague Essia from Tunisia, also to give Essia a chance to reflect on any that we've spoken about, and to speak about perhaps the next plans that they have in Tunisia for taking this work forward.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you to all of you for your presentation. For Tunisia, we are implementing, and we are still implementing the project, the message testing project. Right now, we are running a communication campaign with local associations here in Tunisia, and we are developing a manual for climate change and water resources communication. This manual will serve to trainers, to teachers, and to all people who are interested in communicating about climate change, and in doing training with like different target groups. They can use this manual to prepare and establish and to deliver their trainings. In another hand, we are also open to all researchers and consultants to answer their questions, or to collaborate, especially in the field of climate change, and in how to communicate and how to raise awareness about climate change in the region. Especially in Tunisia. So yeah, this is mainly what I can say. And surely the study and the report we did with our partners with You Climate Outreach and with Can International and Canada Board was really a very interesting research. However, the work we did need like more maybe an extra phase in order to establish and to elaborate recommendations to go in deep with the speech, with the conversation about climate change in Tunisia, because people need more they need more to understand the climate change aspects and challenges in the region. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you so much, Asia. And actually, one thing I was thinking about during this answer as well, something that I think that I have learned myself, is that I think we could use this really powerful tool for hopefully working in other countries that are in the region or share cultural commonalities. But also something that I've learned as someone who works for climate outreach is in the process. We have also, for example, did a training with members of Can Arab World talking about climate change communications. And in that process that I talked about of focusing on listening and focusing on building relationships, there is also other work that we can do at different levels of depth. There's also just having the conversation with each other about what is needed, about what levels of support is needed in different countries around the world. We've done a really big project here, but I think also just having a greater level of conversation and possibility can also help us to birth other creative projects that are similar. Yeah. Musa is, I think, and then perhaps we should pass on to the next question. Musa?
Yeah, I mean, it's more a comment than a question. And this is the word that you have been saying so much, listening. I think it's very important and key word, because generally we people that are exposed to this climate science and this climate communication, we have the tendency to forget sometimes that the people we are talking to or the people we are asking questions, they have something to say. And generally, maybe they don't use the same words as we do, but the words they are using are deeper and more describing the lives they are living because of the climate-induced impact. So, I mean, personally, it humbled me, because when I met some people talking about some topics on climate, I was kind of, wow, these people know all this thing about climate issues, and we still try to see how we can do awareness campaigns and then try to make them understand what they are already living or living for so long. And I think this is something that is, if I had to take from this process, is the humility and the listening part, because I learned a lot from the focus group. And when I was translating the documents, I was kind of saying like, yeah, the people, they really know what they're talking about, but maybe we need from our side also try to understand more and value more what they say.
Thanks, Musa. It's fascinating.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll move to the next question from Samuel. And Samuel wants to know whether the project investigated how the local population feels about potential local solutions like community-based renewables.
We did, that's something that I didn't put in the presentation actually, is we did talk about renewables, actually not so much on a community-based level, but explored people's response to talking about renewables. What we found across all three countries was there was a very, generally, a sort of slightly conflicted attitude, particularly to talking about renewables. People generally, when they were exploring the issue, were very positive about the idea of solar power. And I think this just comes from a simple perspective of living in hot countries. It's a kind of, obvious no-brainer in terms of something that could bring benefit to the country. But obviously the cultural resonances around that, it was also universally seen as something technical, large, far away, expensive, something which isn't being developed. So there was this conflicted positive attitude about seeing the potential of it, but a negative attitude of being put off by the way that it's talked about and the technical language. And there was, in all three countries we explored, people did have some understanding and generally, for example, knew somebody that was using some form of community-based renewables. That came up quite often in the focus groups, but the renewables as a large-scale thing were seen as something technical, far away, hard to control, and outside people's lived experience. So we had a real sense actually of like solar power as perhaps an untapped narrative, as a potential narrative that could be used as the basis for a positive solutions-based story that people could be talking about, the possibility for their country to pick up solar power, to massively expand it, and all the opportunities that brings. But that potential wasn't really being expanded into and explored in reality. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything sort of to reflect on that, but that's what I felt like I saw myself. If not, I'd suggest we move on to the next talk.
Sure. We have another interesting question from Dina. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but Dina is asking, how do we strike the balance between educating decision makers on what the public is experiencing versus, expecting the public to learn more about climate change or the science of it or the awareness around the facts?
Yeah, thank you, Dina. And actually, I was looking in more in depth at your question that you asked before, talking about expressing concern, also some of the language used, the idea of kind of making up facts, talking about people's awareness. And I think for me, actually, this really reflects a little bit what Musa was saying just now about the need for climate change advocates in every country to stop and to have a conversation about what is the knowledge that can be engaged with and listened to from people in speaking communities. And I think you're right that the climate change advocates, campaigners who are working to raise awareness should also focus on the reverse direction, thinking about educating decision makers about what the public experience on their own language and in their own terms. And the kind of that is to some extent like the aim and the logic behind the work that we have done here, is that by listening to people, by breaking down what their values are, what kind of language they use, what kind of what words feel valuable and reflective of their experience, and also that might find a way of helping create conversations that are more genuine. But also, I really, for me, one of the most powerful outputs from this project is that demand to kind of respect and listen to the words of those who are impacted, those who are living climate change, as Musa was saying just now. I don't know if anyone wants to build on that. So Musa, for example.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Because I do think this is a very interesting question, and the way I think about it is, first, I do completely agree. We need to start rethinking about where should we focus in terms of when we campaign or we advocate for anything related to climate change, especially in a country like Egypt or Tunisia. Who should we aim our campaign at? Should we be aiming at decision makers? And when I speak about decision makers, it doesn't have to be at a very high level. It can be at something at a local district, not just governing like 20,000 people. Or should we be speaking to the people and campaigning and raising their awareness? And I think it really depends on the end goal. What are we trying to achieve? I think Musa reflected on this perfectly. In Egypt, from my perspective, we realized we didn't know anything. We weren't the experts. The people were the experts. Even though there were misunderstandings, the people knew more. What we learned is we have to listen more. We need to stop talking. We talk too much. We need to start listening to the people, listening to what the people have in terms of issues. They might not know what climate change is, but they have issues and problems and things they experience. And eventually, when we start to capitalize on these issues, we realize there's a linkage to climate change that they can get as we work with them and appreciate and recognize their issues and challenges that they face. So I'm basically just recognizing this is a thing we need to start thinking about. We need to actively start thinking about who should we be targeting in our narratives and communication.
Can I add something, Robin, quickly?
Yeah, of course.
I think it is both ways. It's not just one side to another. It's both ways, because even during the research, we detected people who want to know more about climate change from a science perspective. So I think both listening to both sides, like decision makers listening to their populations, and same thing like population listening to science and being educated and providing the right, I mean, the education and the information, that it's a complementary process. It's not just one way or the other. It goes both ways, because we still need science, we still need people who are experts in their fields, but of course we need the indigenous knowledge as well, people who know their own lives and what they need, their actual needs. So it's a complementary process, and I think both sides need each other, and I think if we achieve that, then we can really achieve something that can have an impact on the communities in these countries.
Thanks, Fatima. I'll move on to the next question, and I see there are some in our chat window as well. We have somebody from Carbon Literacy Toolkits who wants to know what our panelists' advice would be to increase accessibility to climate change, education, and communications. And this comes from the perspective of a small nonprofit organization who's focused on climate education, with people who live, work, and study mainly in the UK.
This is talking about education to be provided to those people who are based in the UK, rather than the audience that we're talking about in this. I guess I feel, I mean, as in a similar way, we started some of these conversations. It kind of applies the same in every country, is finding out what the need is and what the gap is. And I think there's been a limited attempt sometimes to be made between kind of like the scientific based, the place that science has come from and the language of climate change has come from a scientific basis, and how you can then combine that with thinking about people's values, the framing, the ways in which they see the world, and how you can bring that language together. And there are some basic fundamental principles in the climate outreach research that we've done over the years. For example, thinking about the need, for example, for information to come from a trusted messenger, to come from someone that people trust when they're speaking about climate change. So it's not just about language, it's often also about people who are speaking. But I guess from thinking about a kind of UK audience, I'd encourage people to look back at some of the climate outreach work that we've been doing over the years. We've done some work at climate outreach within the last 6 months or so, called Britain Talks Climate, where we broken down the different audience segments in the UK, so the different perspectives of different sorts of people, people's attitudes, for example, to responsibility, to authoritarianism, and actually then thinking about how that affects how they think about climate change. So when we have the resources and ability as we've had in the UK, it really allows us to kind of go in much more in depth into thinking about different audiences and where people are coming from. So yeah, I'd encourage you to look back at previous climate outreach work for a lot of this.
Thanks, Robin. And at this point, I just want to acknowledge we are running over, but we have some fantastic questions that aren't answered yet. So feel free to stay on as we continue to answer some of the questions that have come in. Another question is understand, I mean, it's a fairly, relevant question given the times that we live in, but how do our panelists think that COVID already has or will change the outcome of the project?
Yeah, I can come in here, but I'm sure my colleagues will also have some thoughts on it. And actually, this is something we didn't put in the presentation for reasons of simplicity, but perhaps we should have. We had, we put a pause on the project in the middle of it as we were going through the methodology and delivered some of our workshops under kind of COVID safe conditions after the pandemic had started. And of course, so there was much to think about from a kind of methodological perspective. I think, we at Climate Outreach have done some work on people's understandings of climate change and how they may change in the context of COVID. And I think actually some of these values around, for example, social solidarity, people working together, people refinding that sense of community and of looking after each other, for me is one of the more kind of positive outputs of the work of what COVID has done to many communities around the world. And while we've experienced that in the UK, we've also saw already in the results coming out of this project that these are really already really powerful values in the cultures that we're talking about. In terms of the order, so for example, the Tunisian work was done well before the pandemic, and the Egyptian work was done both before and after, and the Mauritanian work was largely done after the pandemic. So that is something, in a sense, it's something that we couldn't explore through the process of this project because it happened during it. But I think it is causing. One of the most interesting things that I'm seeing happening to attitudes to climate change, there's a concept called the finite pool of worry, the idea that basically as one thing becomes much more concerning to people, then it starts to sort of push out that made them unable to be engaged with or worry about other worries about climate change. And this was something that a year ago that we thought might happen to concern about climate change. So far, the data that we're seeing is that it's not something that's happening, that at least people are still on a surface level expressing the same levels of concern about climate change now as they were a year ago. But the pandemic is having obviously long-term cultural, social disruptions. We were just talking to one of my colleagues in Tunisia about the rise again of COVID, and it's something, it's a repeated loops, and of course it's going to affect people's ability to engage as the economic and social implications play out longer term. So it's also in the context of a question that is difficult to answer right now because we are in the middle of it. I don't know if other of my panelist colleagues may have other comments on this as well.
Should we move on to the next question then? The next question is again from the chat box, particularly around how are the findings from this project being brought forward to the governments that these studies were conducted in to give them support to take action in terms of climate awareness. In particular, there's a reference to COP27 as well, and the person who asked the question was wondering how could organizations and the governments be made aware of these findings, and how can they make best use of these findings to improve the level of awareness in the country and in the region.
I think it would be great to hear from some of our national leads on this question. I know that in Mauritania and in Egypt and Tunisia, different efforts are underway. And Musa, I don't know if this is something that you'd be willing to speak about. Or Musa might have lost connection.
Hello, maybe I can say that when we launched the first report of Tunisia and the video of the project, we were contacted by the focal point of the UNFCCC here in Tunisia. He was interested to know more about the project and to learn about how we implement the project and how we implement the methodology to get those results. But since that we didn't make like more links with the governments. However, we're working actually to like communicate about the reports and how to make a linkage with what the environment ministry or what governmental structure is actually working, especially with climate communication and with how they are going to explain climate change to local communities and how they are working on let's say making easier the understand of the climate change in the ground. So yes, we were like we were having some like discussions with the governmental institutions in Tunisia, and of course the work will be we will continue working with the government to increase the visibility of the work we did, and how to have kind of working together with the government and with the other stakeholders working on climate change in Tunisia. So mainly we did that.
Thanks, Asia. Yeah, Mohammed, yeah?
Yes. So I think it might be interesting to reflect on us as Greenish in Egypt. How are we going to approach the next step? Now, we're still planning it, but when we spoke to our partners, we got a lot of findings from this project. We have a report that is very clear in terms of its findings in Egypt. So what we are planning to do is basically divide into two things. One is focused on the community, and two is focused on governmental entities and more on decision makers. The community part, we have each local partner we had in Egypt was we were very lucky in this, was in a different governorate or city. There were 3 in Cairo, I think. So Cairo was the most, of course. And each one will have a project related to climate change, focused on solving a problem that is faced in a specific community. And through that project, and these were problems raised in the focus groups and the workshops we conducted. And through that project, we will try to raise awareness regarding climate change in a very, I guess, context-sensitive manner. And on the other hand, we plan to use the Arabic version of the report that will be translated to Egyptian Arabic at one point very soon. We plan to use that with decision makers. So we do a lot of work, for example, when it comes to solid waste management, because there is data growing regarding solid waste management and different areas of pollution, etc. But when it comes to climate change and perspectives people have regarding climate change, we don't have that much information. I think when we did this study, there was barely any information. And a lot of assumptions were being made, especially from my side, for example, when I was doing the research, and I realized that a lot of my assumptions are wrong. So I guess we now have a starting point to use to support us when sitting on someone of some form of decision-making level to discuss, I guess, okay, this is in this location, for example, in Rashid, where there's fishermen, they stated 1 and 2. Why are these issues not being tackled? And then why don't we use that problem in one sense or another, or our way of tackling that issue as a platform to discuss climate change in a context specific.
Thanks, Mohammed. And of course, we have potentially, though we don't know yet for sure, that there may be the next climate change COP may be in Egypt at the end of next year. So we know that Greenish may well have the opportunity to use the report in the run-up to that COP, and it definitely looks like it's going to increase the attention that's paid to the report in Egypt.
All right, thank you so much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our attendees and for engaging thoroughly with the content and asking your questions. I think we have run out of time today, so I'm going to draw this webinar to a close. Thank you to our panelists as well. Thank you for presenting your findings and answering questions. And yeah, have a great evening ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you.